And see, it can take us down in a situation like this because we're really, stuck and there's no fuel.
Flying high in the sky, Air India 101 is getting closer to John F. Kennedy International Airport in preparation for a second landing attempt. After a 14-hour trip, this aircraft recently experienced many sensitive instrument failures. The ILS, a tool that aids pilots in landing their aircraft, particularly in bad weather, has been lost, and they are running low on fuel. There are clouds all around them, and it is pouring rain outside the cockpit. It's practically difficult for the pilots to see the runway because they are flying blind. They are running out of petrol every minute and need to land right away. The pilots' actions during the next few minutes will determine the fate of 357 passengers. Did they manage to save New York from yet another disaster on September 11th? Let's investigate. This is the narrative of Flight 101 of Air India. It's a balmy fall evening at Indira Gandhi International Airport in New Delhi. A group of 15 crew members and 342 passengers were getting ready for their 14-hour flight to New York. The plane was full, and the U.S. is a popular travel destination for Indian visitors and students. The main route operated by Air India connects Delhi's IGI Airport with JFK Airport in New York. Before reaching the United States, the passengers on this journey will cross the Arctic route, passing via the untamed regions of Pakistan, Russia, Finland, Greenland, and Canada. With two GE90-115B engines, the aircraft used for today's voyage was a Boeing 777-300 extended-range twin-jet. After being delivered to Air India in 2009, the aircraft has been in service for more than 9 years. Although the 777 can be piloted by 2 people, AI-11 needed 4 pilots for this mission because it took 15 hours and required to go almost 12,000 kilometers. There were 2 members of the main crew and 2 members of the relief crew. Captain Rustam Pal, a 49-year-old with 3,500 hours of experience on the type, was the commander. Captain D.S. Buddy, Captain Vikas, and Captain Shashant Singh were in the cockpit with him. The 4 of them were flying together for the first time. The engineering team reported that the Auxiliary Power Unit, APU, was not operating during the pre-flight briefing. In general, the APU of an aircraft such as the Boeing 777ER is not deemed essential to the aircraft's safe operation. The APU is not a primary propulsion system, even if it does supply auxiliary power to several aircraft systems when the main engines are not operating. The pilots decided to continue their journey to New York after concluding that the problem was not urgent. Given the likelihood of bad weather in the forecast, the pilot decided to empty an extra 800 kilograms of gasoline so they could land at a different airport in case it became necessary. This would prove to be an important choice. After requesting pushback and taxi clearance, the crew took off from Delhi at 0300 local time, 1 hour later than scheduled. The actual departure went smoothly. The first indications of trouble came about 40 minutes into the flight, soon after reaching 30,000 feet and above Pakistani airspace. A single-source radio altimeter warning message flashed on the pilot's screen. For airplanes, a radio altimeter is similar to a magic ruler that indicates an aircraft's altitude above the Earth. It accomplishes this by launching waves into space and measuring the time it takes for them to return. This aids in safe landings and proper altitude flying by pilots. Like many contemporary commercial aircraft, the Boeing 777 has 3 radio altimeters for safety and redundancy. They do this so that the aircraft may still rely on the other 2 radio altimeters to give precise altitude readings in the event that one malfunctions. However, this aircraft was informing the pilots that just one radio altimeter was operational due to the failure of the other 2. The issue was how to confirm that the one functioning altimeter is, in fact, displaying the proper height. Now, since a different kind of altimeter called a barometric altimeter is utilized during cruises, this is not a problem. The air pressure is used by the barometric altimeter to calculate their elevation above sea level. The idea behind how it works is that atmospheric pressure drops as height rises. However, compared to the radio altimeter, this is less precise. When precise height information is crucial, as it is during takeoff and, more importantly, landing, the radio altimeter becomes invaluable. For the time being, remember this. We'll talk about it again soon. After 10 hours, the aircraft is currently traveling over the Atlantic. Here's where the second problem shows up. It was still 3 hours till the scheduled landing time in New York. The pilots were alerted about the malfunctioning TCS system. The Aircraft Traffic Collision Avoidance System, or TCAS, functions similarly to an intelligent traffic cop. It detects other aircraft in the sky using radar, and when two aircraft approach too closely, it notifies the pilots of each aircraft to either climb higher or lower in order to avoid colliding. By averting plane collisions, it contributes to maintaining air safety. Again, as the TCAS was a backup system designed to avoid collisions during cruise, its loss was not a serious worry. But when you're flying in congested airspace and have a lot on your plate, it's a helpful wingman during takeoff and landing. The crew became concerned about this, as it's not common for unrelated instruments to malfunction. Before takeoff, the APU was not functioning. The radio altimeter malfunctioned shortly after takeoff, and now the TCAS is malfunctioning as well. Their concern was whether there was an unidentified problem with the aircraft that was responsible for all of these malfunctions. They continued on to New York, however, as there was nothing more they could do. It is now approximately 10 minutes after 6 a.m. in New York. There were clouds and rain in the cloudy weather. For runway 04 right, the MEDAR showed a visibility of a quarter statute mile and a vertical visibility of 200 feet. After reaching the airspace over New York, AI-11 communicated with the approach controller.
Good morning, Air India 101, final 4 right.
Air India 101 Heavy, Kennedy Tower, good morning. You're following an Embraer short final, wind 040 at 4, RVR 3000, runway 4 right, clear to land.
4 right, clear to land, Air India 10.
The pilots attempted to use their ILS to catch the localizer and the glide slope to direct them towards the runway after receiving their approach clearance for runway 4 right at JFK. Nevertheless, despite their best efforts, the ILS was unable to pick up the localizer signals. It had also failed their instrument landing system. Aircraft utilizing the ILS for landing find it quite useful. In order to safely guide the aircraft down the runway, it employs specialized radio signals and antennas to tell the pilots where to go and how high they are. Especially in inclement weather, it's like following invisible lines in the sky to ensure a smooth landing. Additionally, the plane's auto-landing feature is provided by this gadget. The ILS in this aircraft was not locking onto the signals coming from the runway. After manually pointing the aircraft in the right direction, the crew attempted an LNAV-VNAV approach. Using GPS technology akin to that found in cars, the LNAV-VNAV approach guides the aircraft in close proximity to the runway. With a lateral precision of 0.3 nautical miles, the LNAV-VNAV is imprecise in comparison to the ILS. Therefore, prior to landing, the pilots must be able to view the runway from their decision height. They will have to circle back and attempt again if they are unable to sight the runway at their minimums. The pilots extended the landing gear as they were getting closer to the runway, and right away, a second warning siren went off in the cockpit. The pilots were advised to take urgent action after receiving this signal, which indicated that the landing gear was not completely down. The pilots are trained to take automatic action, to investigate and resolve the problem upon hearing this sound, and discovered that it was a false alarm and that the gear was in fact down after going through the checklist. This was a major distraction for the pilots, who were already dealing with a lot of work. The jet was traveling between 3 and 4 miles per minute at this moment. With all of the malfunctioning instruments and the warnings for the wrong gear, the pilots chose to circle back and try landing again. Because they were unable to stabilize the aircraft due to multiple instrument failures and incorrect gear warnings.
Okay.
Air India 101 going around runway 4 right.
Air India 101 Heavy, roger, fly runway heading, climb and maintain 2000.
Runway heading 2000, Air India 101. Air India 101 Navig, contact runway 4 right, maintaining 2000, heading 100.
India 101 Heavy, thank you. Radar contact. Turn right heading 180, altimeter 3011.
The crew then notified ATC that they weren't prepared for a second landing attempt just yet, and that they needed longer holding vectors to try to resolve the issues they were experiencing.
And Radar India 101, could we have longer vectors? We were facing some instrument problems as well.
Was that the reason for the go-around?
AFIRM, because we lost the localizer and our minima changed, and there were a lot of issues involved. So we're trying to sort that out, if we can even continue with this approach.
You must now comprehend what a cloud ceiling is in order to comprehend what follows. The height of the cloud base above the surface is known as the cloud ceiling. It indicates to the pilots the altitude at which they can begin to view the ground. The pilots could land the aircraft at 0 feet of cloud cover if it had a functional ILS and autoland capability. To make sure they're landing at the correct spot, the pilots, who were using a non-precision approach, needed to be able to see the runway. And they needed a minimum ceiling of 600 feet in order to do it. The ceiling of JFK Airport was 200 feet. Stewart and Newark airports were their backup options.
Okay, well, right now the weather that I have is showing indefinite ceiling 200 at Kennedy. RVR is 4,500, so that's gotten a little bit better.
The visibility is fine, but the problem we are facing is with the ceiling, because we can't continue with the ILS with a ceiling of 200, because every time we try to lock on to the localizer, the instrumentation doesn't allow us to do that.
Okay, so you cannot do like an autoland or something?
No, autoland is not available, because both, we've got 2 radio altimeter failures. So we're on 1 radio altimeter, we've got TCAS failures, we've got all multiple instrument failures.
So what ceiling do you need?
Anything above like 600 or so.
Okay, I got it. Okay, I understand now. Just fly heading 220, let me find some weather, pull some weather up, and let me find something.
Okay, thanks.
One other problem the pilots were facing was that they wanted to save as much fuel as possible, so they could make further attempts if necessary. This meant they could not land farther out to Boston or Washington. Instead, they had to land at an airport close to the New York area.
And just before I go away, what was your potential alternate?
The primary alternate was Newark, and the secondary alternate is Stewart, but both seem to be, in the same sort of situation.
Their gasoline was running low, and they were starting to draw from their reserves. It was beginning to come in handy that they had loaded an extra 800 kilograms in Delhi.
Air India 101 Heavy, I'm having trouble finding anything that's really that good. I have Albany is 600 feet overcast, and Boston, Logan would be 500 overcast. I'm trying to find Washington Dulles is at 200 feet also.
We're just checking Boston as well, because we're getting a little low on the fuel as well, so we need to decide quick. And we're burning quite a lot at this altitude.
Get higher, we can burn a little less fuel, and then I believe Pittsburgh is 2,500.
2005, we'll have to just check for the fuel as far as Pittsburgh goes.
Air India 101 Heavy, climb maintain 6,000.
Climb maintain 6,000, Air India 101.
Air India 101 Heavy, I think based on the weather that we have in the area and based on the forecast that I'm seeing, I think Bradley, Kilo Bravo Delta Lima will be your best option.
Okay, and what's the ceiling there?
Okay, right now the ceiling there is 500 overcast.
Got a trend showing the ceiling at JFK is also improving a bit. I could try a VNAV approach.
Okay.
And see, it can take us down in a situation like this, because we're really, stuck and there's no fuel.
And I'm showing Newark just had a special, and they're showing 400 overcast. They just had a special at 1205 Zulu, so about 6 minutes ago.
Okay, so it's a bit better now in Newark, is that correct?
Yes, sir. The weather came up to 400 feet overcast at Newark.
The pilots were then informed by the departure controller of a newly released special meter by Newark, which indicated that the ceiling had lifted to 400 feet. The pilots made the decision to try a 400-foot ceiling landing at Newark. Recall that they were still in danger because this is still lower than the 600 feet they had originally desired.
Okay, so you want to do the VNAV approach into Newark, is that correct?
That's right. That's the only option that we have because, this ILS is unpredictable because every time we turn towards the localizer, it's just gone.
Okay, so your ILS is out of service on both sides of the airplane, right?
That's correct.
And then you said also the radar altimeters are out on both sides of the airplane?
That's right. We are on a single radio altimeter now.
At this point, the plane had just around 7,200 kilograms of fuel left, just enough to complete the trip.
Aaron, do you wonder, other than both ILSs, both radar altimeters, what other things have failed on the airplane?
Single source radio altimeter. We've got TCAS failure, no auto land, windshield system, auto speed brake, and APU is unserviceable as well.
And in a grim reminder to the pilots of how precarious their position was, the controller asked them,
Aaron, do you want to, so just when you get a chance, give me the people on board and the fuel on board, please.
We have total of 370 and fuel, 7,200 kgs right there, 101.
The pilots were then handed off to the Newark approach controller, who cleared them for the 4-right approach.
India 101 heavy, 210 miles from Dune, turn right heading 010, meet me 3 knots, that's all set, the localizer is cleared, ILS runway 4-right approach.
The controller then scrambled the emergency vehicles in case assistance was required once the plane landed.
India 101 heavy, emergency personnel will be standing by.
Secure India 101.
Truck 1, while we wait here, nature of emergency is a computer failure. Aircraft type is a Boeing 777 Whiskey model. 270 souls on board and 72,000 kilos of fuel.
The crew had been flying in a high-stress environment for more than 14 hours when they attempted to land a large, fully loaded aircraft in one of the busiest air corridors in the world without all of their regular instruments. In addition, the pilot's view outside the cockpit was limited to clouds, and as time went on, they hoped that the clouds would break and reveal the runway below as they continued to descend. Additionally, the jet was above the appropriate descending path as it passed 1,000 feet. If this wasn't immediately remedied, the plane would have to circle around and spend additional fuel, which they didn't have. In an attempt to fix this and return the aircraft to the optimal course, Captain Pia pushed the nose down, but this just made it accelerate even more. Additionally, the controllers once noticed a warning on their screen that said the aircraft was flying dangerously close to the ground, and they informed the pilots of this. When the clouds finally parted at 400 feet, they realized they were too high and too far to the right of their intended position. After 15 hours of flight, the aircraft finally made a safe landing on runway 4 at Newark, at precisely the time that Captain Pia corrected the flight by moving the nose down and to the left to get the plane to line up with the center line. The pilots were then contacted by emergency services to inquire whether they needed any help, but they declined. 10 minutes after landing, a rainstorm covered the entire airport as they were taxiing to the gate. The crew would not have been able to land if they had needed to conduct a second go-around or had to postpone their approach by 5 minutes. Unfortunately, Air India has not produced an incident report or an investigation report. Therefore, the cause of these many instrument failures is still unknown. The primary computer of the aircraft, which manages the maintenance, diagnostic, and flight technician systems, is thought to have malfunctioned and provided the pilots with erroneous data. The pilots, who were a crew of 4 and had never worked together before, showed excellent crew resource management by communicating with air traffic control and one another in a way that made the plane land safely. The following day, the aircraft was flown as a ferry flight for relocation back to India.